This is the fourth video for ethics and legal considerations in animal chiropractic. In this video, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of regulatory schemes. I want to make a couple comments initially. The first is that each state has its own regulatory scheme. Whatever state you are practicing in, you need to be familiar with what's required by that state's rules. I am by no means trying to provide a comprehensive review of all 50 states, of all the different regulations that may be applicable to delegation of authority and so forth. Now, the second thing I want to make clear is that my focus is on regulations and statutes that have already been adopted. Just because a statute has been proposed is pretty meaningless. It may be an indication of what's to come in the future, but there are a lot of statutes that get proposed and never get passed, never become law. So I don't want to be distracted by the activities that are out there to change some of these rules. Doesn't mean those activities are not important, but just for purposes of this class, I think that would make it much more difficult uh, to try to develop a reasonable size or reasonable amount of material for you to learn. So generally, the overview or the regulatory schemes, I've seen three different schemes that are pretty kind of three categories of schemes. Now, the first one, which is still pretty common, is silence. There's no mention of animal chiropractic. There's no mention of musculoskeletal manipulation. Uh, no mention in the statute or the regulations at all about this care. But what these statutes do have universally is a very broad definition of the practice of veterinary medicine. And if you're trying to provide any kind of care or treatment for an animal, you are practicing veterinary medicine. So my recommendation is that even though there's no mention of animal chiropractic, you should always assume that only a veterinarian can provide animal chiropractic care, or that animal chiropractic care can be provided only under the delegation and supervision of a licensed veterinarian. Now, the second scheme, which I think is more common, um, or becoming more common, I should say, is that they are including animal chiropractic within the definition of practicing veterinary medicine. So there, in this case, there's no question that providing animal chiropractic is practicing veterinary medicine. And if you don't have a license as a veterinarian, you are practicing without a license, subject to those penalties, including criminal penalties that I mentioned in the last video. But just by including that definition or including animal chiropractic in the definition still leaves some unanswered questions. Uh, a veterinarian can delegate, and when they delegate, question is how much supervision are they required to provide? What level of supervision? Is it just general supervision or immediate supervision or direct supervision? And there's also a question about the qualifications of who can adjust the animals. Again, I'm starting from the premise that our goal is to protect the patients and protect the public. And if your goal is to protect the patients, you want to be certain that the persons providing the chiropractic care are properly trained and qualified to be providing that care, whether they're veterinarians or chiropractors. And that it's not just somebody who's overconfident in their abilities who's trying to provide the care. And the third scheme, which is still very rare, is that certified chiropractors are allowed to adjust without any supervision from a veterinarian. So generally, these states are going to require that the chiropractors have some certification to work with animals. Typically, a VCA certification is adequate. They may also require that the chiropractors have a valid license to practice chiropractic care in that state. And they may also place other requirements like malpractice insurance requirements on the chiropractors. But once they've given that, once the chiropractors have met those requirements, then they're going to be allowed to adjust without any veterinary supervision. They may be allowed to adjust without any referral from a veterinarian. Um, and that really gives the chiropractors a fair amount of independence when they're working with animals. On the one hand, that can be a good thing because that also shifts the responsibility. In situations where the veterinarian is still responsible for supervising the chiropractic care, that's also going to mean that the veterinarian will often have responsibility if the chiropractic care is not provided properly. But in situations where the chiropractors can adjust without supervision, there's no question that it is the chiropractor and only the chiropractor who's responsible if the care is not provided appropriately. So generally, if the scope of veterinary medicine includes chiropractic, then only a veterinarian or someone acting under a veterinarian's supervision with proper delegation may practice animal chiropractic. So in the first two schemes we talked about, where the statutes are silent or where the statutes define the practice of veterinary medicine as including animal chiropractic, this is the proper assumption to make. So one argument that some people have tried to make where the statutes are silent is that the chiropractic license must include the ability to treat animals. And I think that has been universally rejected. Here's an example of a case out of Michigan where that argument was made. And I believe the Michigan Chiropractic Act at that time referred to chiropractic as treatment of the spine, but did not include a limitation to human spines. So the chiropractor made the argument that that must mean that the scope of chiropractic allowed them to treat animals. The court made it very clear that the education of chiropractors is to treat humans, and the scope of the chiropractic license did not include treatment of animals. But the court also observed that, you know what, if a veterinarian could have delegated to a chiropractor to provide the animal chiropractic care and could have supervised that chiropractic care. And in that circumstance, it would have been legal. So it could have been legal if it had been done properly, but because it was not done properly and the chiropractor was trying to act beyond the scope of what their license allowed, they were sanctioned for their misconduct. Here's an opinion from Arizona that expresses the same conclusion. Just having a chiropractic license does not give you any particular authorization to perform veterinary medicine, that is, to treat animals. Um, Again, I think this is pretty universal and pretty clear in almost every statute. It's pretty clear that the chiropractic license is limited to treating human patients. And it's not going to be a good argument to argue that a chiropractic license somehow gives you the authority to treat animals as well. Uh, Same kind of analogy with respect to acupuncture. Um, Acupuncture was not included in the definition of veterinary medicine, but as the court evaluated it, if acupuncture is being used to treat animals, that means it's going to be subject to regulation by veterinarians, subject to regulation by the State Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners. Here's an example of a statute that includes the definition of animal chiropractic and the definition of veterinary medicine. And this type of definition is pretty typical. Not every state is going to copy this exactly, but you will often see a general statement about diagnosing, treatment, or basically working on animals, and then a list of different activities that are included within veterinary medicine. And those actions are pretty explicit. I think if you're treating an animal, if you are working on an animal, that is going to be the practice of veterinary medicine in virtually every state. It is also practicing veterinary medicine if you hold yourself out to the public is being available or willing to perform those acts, or using titles or words that indicate you have qualifications to perform those acts. So, for example, in a state where there's animal chiropractic is clearly included in the definition of the practice of veterinary medicine, if you advertise that you are an animal chiropractor, you have probably violated that statute. You are probably practicing veterinary medicine without a license. So even though you haven't touched an animal, even though you only work on animals under supervision with appropriate supervision, um, just advertising that you provide that service can be the practice of veterinary medicine. Texas has also made it very clear through its regulations, not in its statute, but in its regulations, it's made it clear that animal chiropractic is included within the definition of the practice of veterinary medicine, and that animal chiropractic is considered an alternative therapy. Tennessee in its regulations has also made it clear practice of veterinary medicine includes chiropractic therapy. Here's a number of other states. Again, I don't know if this is a comprehensive list or not, but it's certainly a good list to show you that there are a number of states who have looked at this and have made it clear that they think animal chiropractic is the practice of veterinary medicine and is regulated by the Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners. So the three schemes, if there's silence, there is no mention in the statutes or the regulations about animal chiropractic. You should always work with the assumption that only veterinarians can provide animal chiropractic or other people working under proper delegation and supervision by those veterinarians. If animal chiropractic is specifically included in the definition of veterinary medicine, you no longer have to make that assumption. You know for sure that only veterinarians can provide animal chiropractic or other persons acting under their delegation or supervision. And if you're in one of the states that allows certified chiropractors to adjust without supervision, chiropractors who meet the requirements and register as appropriate with the states may have direct access to patients. Depending on the state rules, there may or may not be a requirement for a referral or some type of direction from a veterinarian. So those are the three general schemes. In the next video, I'm going to try to walk through some of the state rules and regulations to give you some ideas of what's required in the various states.